when, how I like to frame it in my mind is typically we're talking about Abrahamic traditions, and then we're talking about non-Abrahamic traditions, right? So we're talking about, you know, Muslim, Christianity, and maybe Judaism, which tends to be central. People are familiar with, people are comfortable talking about and asking those questions. However, when we're talking about non-Abrahamic traditions, people are also very comfortable talking about, Hinduism, right? They can also be very comfortable talking about people who are even atheists, who, have no spiritual tradition. But what I've experienced is the level of what I believe to be anti-Blackness that comes forth when we begin talking about African-centered spiritual practices, right? Spiritual practices that come through the diaspora, but that are rooted in straight up and down Africanness. And so it's interesting because over the course of the past, I would say 6 months, I've seen a lot of people lean more into their spirituality. And because as BIPOC people, especially, Black people living in America, and mostly throughout the Americas, even in the Caribbean, being Christian tends to be the most central faith-based identity that people are verbal and vocal about. In these therapy streets, it's real hard. You know what I mean? Like with a capital H, capital ARD, to have clinicians of color, I would even say predominantly Black clinicians, have conversations with and about individuals who are faith-based and not rooted in Christianity. And there's a lot of judgment, there's a lot of misinformation, and we do have to recognize that misinformation is rooted in the fact that many of our practices are so sacred, and they need to be so protected because there has been so much judgment, there has been so much punishment because of the ways that we practice and the misinformation surrounding it. And so, yeah, many people don't talk about it. And when you try to introduce it, when you even bring up something that would be relatively, I would consider mainstream, as tarot or astrology, there's all of these conversations about if it's appropriate to discuss that in the therapy room, much less, talking about Ebo, right? Sacrifices, right? Much less talking about spiritual ceremony and the impact that it may have on you, much less talking about someone who engages with spirit regularly, meaning sees spirits, communicates with spirits. And so these are conversations not really had often. And when we attempt to broach them, when I've attempted to broach them in different therapeutic communities, I find that the most pushback I get are from Black clinicians.